Bow to mine infallible judgment.
So I've previously done a day in Mentor Roulette as Sage, where I went through 20 duty roulettes in around 6 hours, so have a look at how bad it is, so to speak. Personally, I had a great time going through most of those roulettes, if not outright all of them, so I decided to take another go, this time going 6 hours as Warrior. This might also well be the start of my own journey to work through all those Mentor Roulettes for real this time, although it might take a long time. With that said, I started this session with 34 Mentor Roulettes finished. Compared to last time, I had a lot more wipes, but you probably already know that given the teaser sequence at the start, and even an entirely failed duty you could say. This time, I will also instead show and talk about each duty in the order they came up in, instead of sorting them. I started the session at around noon, with being a replacement in Praetorium no less. The sad part there is, of course, that going into it with Mentor Roulette means I don't get the juicy MSQ Roulette daily bonus, but instead the much more lean Mentor Roulette daily bonus, and of course a clear on that achievement. Nothing particularly amazing happened in this run, unless the healer's lunch was amazing. I guess I'd have to ask them.
Do you believe in Eorzea?
I believe in amazing lunches. After that, I got into the burn, where I noticed the healer was not using Dyscrasia when there were plenty of targets to do so. Asked if I could give them advice, they said yes, so off I went. A reasonably simple adjustment. At the end of the dungeon, I also realized that the Dragoon was using Dragon Sight on only themselves, so I mentioned they could share it. But as the duty was already over, I won't ever know if they even read it. Maybe next time. Aside from this, the duty went very smoothly. By the way, did you know that Warrior can solo the burn synced? For my third duty, we landed in the Aitiascope, which is quite spoilery, so if you haven't done this duty and don't want to see any more of it, then hop to this timestamp where the next duty begins. With that said, we went through the entire duty with no major problems, although one of the black mages seemed to have a really hard time, which they also said themselves. At that point, how could you possibly blame them? I mean, aside from their missing the Horsefant buff. I tried giving them some encouraging words as we finished the duty. Quite early in the duty I took note that it seemed like our sage was a bit aggressive with applying spell shields, but it seemed like they relaxed more and more as we progressed through the duty. Also, hello to you in case you're watching this. For the fourth duty, I had my only Guildhest of the day. I was promised that Mentor Roulette was filled with these things. What gives? Anyway, nothing of note happened here. I believe you're supposed to turn off these flames to make the boss more susceptible to damage or something? I'm not sure, but it got wild with the amount of ads, although it didn't feel very threatening. Weird. For the fifth duty, we land in Qitana Ravel. Hey, did you know that Warrior can solo Qitana Ravel? Anyway, again, we had no major issues, with the one outlier being that I noticed the sage was quite aggressive with putting out spell shields. In this case, I did not feel like this relented much throughout the dungeon. However, they did do decent damage when they were attacking, and I feel like being a bit on the extra defensive side in Shadowbringer's leveling duties that have a tendency to be surprisingly tough for some players is totally understandable. Hence, I didn't really bring it up. I may have attempted to heal myself more aggressively though, to see if it caused them to shield me less. A bit too many shields is a minor mistake in my book, especially in a leveling duty. For the sixth duty, we had Ghimlyt Dark, where it seemed like the Reaper was having quite a hard time here and there. Not much I could help with, since it was heavily related to mistakes on boss mechanics. Maybe they were still learning the job and it took their focus away. Ultimately, it felt like the run went about as fast as normal. And also, who can focus on mistakes when there's a Lalafell like this in the group? 10 out of 10. They even glammed their Carby to match. For duty 7, we went to Malikah's well. Hey, did you know that Warrior can solo... Sorry, I'll stop now. Anyway, the standout things this time was that I got the impression that maybe the Reaper was still learning their job, but I can't say for certain on this one. Another observation was that the Scholar was a lot more defensive in the first few pulls and then eased up later. I based this observation on the simple fact that they were using Adloquium more aggressively at the start, but didn't use it during the mega pull before the second boss. So, overall, an excellent run. For Duty 8, I joined as a replacement for an 8-minute-old group. That's often an indicator that it is time for Extreme. However, no, it was indeed just Aurum Vale. With a somewhat concerned group that told me they had a Marauder at first, who either left or got booted, but after that, they had 2 other tanks that instantly left when they saw it was Aurum Vale. As a replacement, no less. But this was a very easy run, honestly. As long as the healer can keep up with the healing and the tank is fine, Aurum Vale is very beatable. For Duty 9, we then go to Holminster Switch, which has some notorious sprout stomping pulls in it. Guess what? Healer's a sprout. Despite this, I pull like I normally do. I know as a warrior that I can probably survive long enough that we can overcome it. So after the first big pull, I let the sage know that it is okay to attack a bit more. After receiving no response and apparently very little to no change in behavior, I realized that the sprout might not actually understand very much English. Throughout the duty, I pay closer attention to the sprout to see how they play overall, and I also consider what I should tell them if I could somehow bridge the language barrier. Puis proposer un conseil? But after enough observation, I come to the conclusion that, considering they managed to overcome the hard pulls in the dungeon despite all this, and there's so much to unpack, that it was safer to let them stay an overly defensive healer while they get some more practice with the job, rather than try and push them into something that just does not work for them. I was, though, mildly disappointed that despite all the healing, slow was never removed with the Shuna. For Duty 10, we had a good old classic, Sastasha Normal. The only particular thing of note is that it appeared that the archer was a genuine first-timer, while the pugilist was in a bit of a hurry. The rest of us diligently waited for cutscenes though. For Duty 11, I was once again a replacement. 0 minutes, which tends to be a bad sign for something real terrible, I guess, or something that people just don't wanna do. But it was just Labyrinth of the Ancients. During the run, I identified a friend, but aside from that, we have 2 particularly interesting observations. I always hear so many opinions that the dragon should always be tanked north due to this or that. But I think we have now discovered a reason why Dragon in Narnia might actually be an outright problem for once. What do you mean 90% of the room getting marked with a 20-second crowd control mechanic you might be unable to dodge in time? Fortunately, it happened as the fight was ending anyway, so I am, of course, mostly joking. My second observation was on Phlegathon. Usually it is the easiest if the B group tank takes the boss and tanks him sort of in the middle. The reason for this is that if he's too far to either side, guess which side might find it difficult to make it to their platforms in time? We wiped, so on the second go, I decided to take the reins myself, and it appears both of the other tanks just let me do it. We managed to get through after that. For Duty 12, we landed in St. Mocianne's Arboretum hard, which I found surprising given how long it has been since I landed here randomly before. The healer was very interested in helping with understanding mechanics for everyone else, with marking themselves, jumping over in advance and things like that. However, I did find it interesting that they went so soon every time. Another thing was also that I observed that they made the uncommon mistake of actively trying to space out holy casts to make sure you get the most out of each stun. This is actually not necessary due to how holy and stun diminishing returns work, as I demonstrated in episode 2 of my Final Fantasy XIV Mythbusters series. Besides that, they were excellent at utilizing the dungeon's mechanics like the shower near the end and also managing the mud slime on the final boss. For Duty 13, we go to Copperbell Mines hard, which is just an extremely weird and awkward dungeon, honestly. So I feel like a lot of the things I could observe, it is possible that the player was playing weirdly because of confusion due to the dungeon itself. We had no wipes too, so the one thing I could highlight is that the Scholar was using Ruin quite a lot for level 50 dungeon where auto-attacking makes Art of War gain on 1. For duty 14, I get another 0 minutes replacement. What danger lurks beyond? What terrible duty could we possibly get where the tank ran away screaming upon seeing it? Well, Amaurot of course. What? Why though? It's such a good dungeon. If you are in the Shadowbringers MSQ, this might be somewhat spoilery, so you can skip to the next part with this timestamp if you like. Overall, we had no big issues with the chaser mobs, which I normally get actually, where people flee with them causing more problems. However, the big thing is that on the first boss, well, half the group died. But did you know that Warrior can actually solo that boss? So we continued right along through. I also noted that the healer seemed to be a first-timer, which excuses basically all the mistakes they had, which weren't many either. For duty 15, things start to get murky as we land in Thordan EX waiting room. After around 8 minutes without finding a healer replacement, we give up, without even pulling the boss once. At least not seriously. I feel for this particular situation, just some elevator music would have been more fitting for what we accomplished compared to the music playing in the Thordan fight itself. As you will be able to see from the clock in the top right, I took a bit of a break here. Now, after that break, for duty 16, we went into Garuda normal, and I was reminded that the cutscene for this one is quite long. The only thing of note here is that I felt like I needed to use potions a few times here, which was no big deal of course, but I wonder what would have happened in regards to healing if I had no potions. And then, for duty 17, the grand finale of this 6-hour extravaganza, Zurvan Extreme. By the way, the same healer from the Thordan EX group. I want to give them props because they read up on the boss and read or watched guides before going in, so at least they weren't entirely lost. I also want to give props to Ria here, who was excellent at explaining the mechanics for everyone. Personally, I've never done Zurvan Extreme synced, so I had no idea what was important and what wasn't. With that said, we had a few wipes. In fact, it got totally down to the wire where we intentionally wiped fast at one point to try again, just so we had enough time for one last try. And this is how the last try went. Right here at the start, I messed up my opener because I offered the first timers that we could run them through unsynced if they just wanted it off their quest log, which they did say they appreciated earlier. So, of course, I had to let them know where to go so I could find them. Also because other mentors in the group also offered to help. In the first attempts, we got completely dumpstered by this sequence of attacks of Biting Halberd, Southern Cross, and then the Cyclical or Tail End. In particular, Tail End seemed much less common, so we usually got caught off guard when that came up and not Cyclical. This is also why I didn't realize until now that the lines on the floor did in fact not indicate where the circle AoE struck. For the ad phase, we sort of found out naturally how to spread the mobs over several poles, as ultimately it didn't matter who tanked what, as long as one of us didn't have to tank everything all the time, mostly because there was no need for that. It took wiping to the meteor summoning mob once for everyone to realize it must die first. After that, we have that, what did you call it, Zurvan?
Bow to mine infallible judgment.
Right, that. I want to note that by this point we had 25% increased stats from Echo as well. Then we had the pair tethers. Given that we were not at all worried about the enrage timer, it was possible to simply use ranged attacks for a bit if there was no safe way to get up close. We also never really got good at dodging the wave cannon properly, or Southern Cross. For those wondering, the easiest way to deal with it is for everyone to stack up, then when the cast finishes, have the tank run in one direction and everyone else in the other. That way, you don't run into a situation where you're caught in the frontal cone cleaves, like this. Then we had the Broken Seal, which just so happened to do the configuration we had the most trouble with. Now, we had trouble with doing Southern Cross consistently the entire duty, so Southern Cross right into Broken Seal was brutal, as it is a body check type of mechanic, and most of the raid will die if we're down 1 or 2 players for it. Biting Halberd coming up after that gave us a bit of breathing room since we all knew how to deal with that. We actually managed to recover somewhat completely, but then an unfortunate Southern Cross into another broken seal. Thanks to a tank limit break, we have enough survivors that this is still possible to recover from. But then Talent comes up immediately after, another mechanic we hadn't seen too much of, sniping a few more players. And now we're down to the wire. No time for another try. 3 players alive, LB spent, and 3% on the boss. We see a mechanic we didn't get to in any other try before this one. Saw. Is it over? Of course not. Holmgang saves the day. How have your Mentor Roulettes been? Better than mine? Worse than mine? I'm curious how big the difference is between regions, and I am on EU Chaos, so who knows, maybe that makes a difference. I would love to hear about your experiences as well, and I would also appreciate feedback on this. If I made more videos like this one, is this format fine? Or did you prefer when I sorted them in a specific way? Is the amount of duties good, or do you feel like I speed through some of them a bit too fast for time or something? Anyway, thank you in advance. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, Skip Saw was a tactic wherein you potentially brought an extra DPS in exchange for single tanking the fight, which allowed you to push Zurvan far enough on HP that he would skip Saw after the first intermission. Notably, power creep seems to have made this wildly unnecessary to be worried about, but it is interesting to note that it used to be a thing.